My name is Diane Castellano. I'm 61 years old, and for 31 years I worked as a forensic accountant, which meant one simple thing: people paid me to find the money that other people had tried to make disappear. I was standing in my daughter's half-finished dining room, holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched, thinking about two things at once. The first was the sentence I was about to say out loud. 4 words I had rehearsed in my car for 20 minutes before I came inside. The second was a manila folder sitting in my tote bag by the door, a folder my son-in-law didn't know I had, and didn't know I'd already read twice. In 15 minutes, everyone in that room was going to hear both of those things. Only one of them would come from me. Welcome back to MJ Drama Stories, where every story starts with silence and ends with power. If you've ever loved a family member enough to protect them from themselves, even when they hated you for it, this one's for you. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. But to understand what happened in that dining room, you have to go back 4 years. To a spreadsheet, a promise, and a granddaughter who was 3 days old. I retired 2 years ago, but for 3 decades I was the person companies called when the numbers didn't add up. Insurance fraud, embezzlement, divorces where one spouse swore under oath there was no hidden money. I sat across from liars for a living, and I got good at one specific thing: patience. I never accused anyone in the first meeting. I let people talk themselves into corners. I just watched the paper trail and waited. My husband Frank used to say I had the calmest poker face in Ohio. He wasn't wrong. When our house flooded in 2009 and the insurance adjuster tried to lowball us by $11,000, I just laid 3 years of receipts on his hood, one at a time, in silence, until he wrote a new number. Frank died 6 years ago. Heart attack, no warning, 41 years of marriage ending on a Tuesday in the cereal aisle of a grocery store. After that, my daughter Renata became the center of what was left of my life. She's 34 now, married to a man named Colton, and together they have 2 children, Josie, who's 7, and Bo, who just turned 4. I have one habit that used to embarrass Renata as a teenager, and now apparently embarrasses her as an adult. I keep a small spiral notebook in my purse. Not a phone note. A physical notebook, the kind you can flip through with your thumb. I write down dates, numbers, and exact quotes from conversations that feel important, even when I don't yet know why they're important. Frank used to tease me that I documented our marriage like it might end up in court. I never thought I'd need that habit again after I retired. I was wrong. Inciting incident: the message came on a Sunday night in March, 11:40, later than Renata usually texted. Mom, can you call me tomorrow? We need to talk about the trust. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on my nightstand and stared at the ceiling for a long time, because I already knew, with the specific dread of someone who's read 1,000 financial statements, exactly what kind of conversation this was going to be. We spoke the next afternoon. Renata's voice had that bright, rehearsed quality she used to use before asking Frank for the car keys in high school. Colton's been talking to a lender, she said. About the house on Birchwood. Mom, it's perfect. Good schools, a yard for the kids, everything we've wanted. But the lender wants to see stronger reserves before they'll approve us at the rate we need. Okay, I said carefully. What does that mean for me? It means, she said, and here it came. We were hoping you could just let the bank know the kids' trust exists. As an asset. It wouldn't cost you anything. You wouldn't have to give us a cent. Just a letter. I already knew that wasn't true, because I'd written the trust documents myself with my attorney, and I knew exactly what letting a bank see it would actually mean once a loan officer got their hands on the number. But I said only, let me think about it. You always say that, she sighed, and there it was, the phrase, small and sharp, dropped almost carelessly. You always have to control everything, Mom. Control everything. I wrote it down in the notebook that night, word for word, with the date beside it. I didn't know yet that I'd be writing it 2 more times before this was over. Backstory: why the trust exists. To understand why that phrase landed the way it did, you need to understand Colton. Colton is not a bad man. I want to say that clearly, because this isn't a story about a villain. It's a story about pressure, and what pressure does to people who were never taught how to carry it. He's charming, genuinely funny, good with the kids in the physical, rough-and-tumble way that Frank used to be. Renata fell for him fast, and for the first 2 years of their marriage, I liked him. The trouble started with his business. Colton had spent a decade in construction management before deciding, at 30, to start his own contracting company. I understood the impulse. Frank had done something similar in his 40s. What I didn't understand, not until later, was the pattern underneath it. The first sign was small. 18 months into the business, Colton asked Renata to ask me for $8,000 to cover a gap in payroll. I gave it to them as a gift, no strings, because that's what grandparents do. 6 months later, it was $11,000 for equipment. Then it was a bridge loan of $19,000 that was supposed to be repaid in 90 days and never was, though nobody ever said the word never out loud. It just quietly stopped being mentioned. I didn't say anything. I told myself that's what family does. You help when you can, quietly, and you don't turn love into an invoice. But reading financial statements had trained something in me that I couldn't turn off. And what I saw wasn't a business with bad luck. It was a business with a pattern. Money came in, and money left faster than it should have, and the explanations changed slightly every time I asked a follow-up question. Then Josie was born. I remember standing in the hospital room, holding my first grandchild, and feeling something crack open in my chest that had been sealed shut since Frank died. I remember thinking, I am not going to let this child inherit a house of cards. Not out of distrust of Renata, out of love for a baby who hadn't done anything yet to earn or lose anyone's trust. 2 weeks after Josie came home, I met with my attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Priya Anand, who had handled Frank's estate. I set aside $400,000, split into 2 irrevocable trusts, one for Josie, and a second one 4 years later for Beau, funded by Frank's life insurance and the sale of our second property. The terms were simple, and, I believed, the money would be held, invested conservatively, and released to each grandchild at 25, or earlier, only for a documented trustee-approved expense directly benefiting the child, medical care, education, a first home in their own name. I named myself sole trustee. Not because I didn't trust Renata to be a good mother, because I did not trust the arithmetic of Colton's business to leave the money alone if it ever became reachable. I told them about it plainly, the way I've always tried to do everything. This is for Josie and Beau, I said. Not for either of you, not for emergencies, not for the business. If you ever need real help, come to me directly and we'll talk about it as adults. But this money doesn't touch adult problems. That's the whole point of it. Renata had nodded. That's smart, Mom, she'd said. I remember being relieved. I remember thinking the hardest conversation was already behind us. I have to be honest about something else, though, something I didn't admit to anyone for a long time, not even to Priya. Part of why I fought so hard to keep that trust untouchable wasn't only protection. It was also this. Since Frank died, being needed by my daughter's family was the only room in my life that still felt full. Sunday dinners, school pickups, the sound of Beau's feet running down the hallway toward me. That was what I had instead of a husband. I think some small, unspoken part of me was afraid that if I stopped being useful to them, I would simply stop being necessary at all. That fear is not admirable. But it's true, and it's the reason this took me longer to see clearly than it should have. Internal conflict. I called my sister Josephine that same night. They want the trust listed as an asset for a mortgage, I told her. I don't think that's as harmless as Renata's making it sound. It's not harmless, Josephine said flatly. She'd spent 20 years as a paralegal and had no patience for soft language around hard facts. Diane, the second a lender sees that number on paper, they will ask for documentation. And the second Colton realizes documentation might actually put money in his hands, even temporarily, he is not going to let that go easily. You know that. You've known men like that your whole career. I don't think Colton would push it that far. You're not being asked whether Colton would push it, Josephine said. You're being asked whether you're going to hand a struggling business a key to $500,000 that belongs to 2 little kids, based on a hope. I sat with that for a long moment. She's my daughter, Joe. I don't want to become the villain in her story over a piece of paper. Better the villain in her story, Josephine said, than the reason Josie and Beau have nothing at 25. I told her I'd think about it. I did not tell her I already knew what I was going to do. I just wasn't ready yet to say it out loud, because saying it out loud would make it real, and once it was real, I understood. With the exact clarity I used to feel walking into a fraud case I already knew I could prove. There would be no quiet way back from it. The invitation that grew. 2 weeks after that phone call, Renata called again, warmer this time, almost giddy. "We put an offer in on Birchwood," she said. "It's not final, but Mom, we want to celebrate. Just a small dinner. You, me, Colton, the kids. Nothing fancy. Just the 4 of us," she said. Nothing fancy. When I arrived the following Saturday, there were 14 cars on the street. I stood in the driveway for a moment before going in, recounting the guest list in my head the way I used to recount line items on a spreadsheet that didn't balance. Colton's business partner, Reggie. Colton's parents. 2 neighbors I didn't recognize. A woman introduced to me at the door as our loan officer, Kim. Isn't that funny? She just happened to be free tonight. It wasn't funny. It was a stage, and I hadn't been told I was walking into a performance. The cracked strap and the $400 bottle. Inside, the contrast hit me before anyone said. Renata's purse, the same worn tan leather one she'd carried for 3 years, sat on the kitchen counter with its strap held together by a paperclip she'd twisted through the stitching herself. 12 inches from it, on the same counter, sat a bottle of wine I recognized. I'd priced one just like it for a client's expense fraud case 8 months earlier. 400 and change easily. A house they were straining to qualify for. A purse strap held by a paperclip. A $400 bottle of wine breathing on the counter like it belonged there. Something in me, the old forensic instinct, quietly opened a file, the folder. Around 8:30, I went looking for the bathroom and took a wrong turn into what was clearly meant to be Colton's home office. Boxes still half unpacked from the move. A laptop open on the desk, and beside it, a slim accordion folder labeled, in Colton's handwriting, Riverstone, do not scan. I want to be honest with you, I hesitated for exactly as long as it takes to breathe in and out once. Then I opened it, because 31 years of training does not simply turn off because you're standing in your son-in-law's house instead of a courtroom annex. Inside were 3 things. A second separate business bank account under the name Riverstone Contracting LLC. A name I had never once heard mentioned in 4 years of Colton talking about his company. A stack of invoices billed to clients of his real business, Castellano Blake Construction, but paid into that Riverstone account instead. And a printed pre-approval letter from the same lender sitting at that party, dated 11 days earlier, 11 days before he and Renata had supposedly just decided to make an offer, listing our family trust in black and white as a pending qualifying asset. I'd say yes. They had already told the bank yes, on my behalf, before they ever asked me. I photographed 4 pages with my phone, closed the folder exactly the way I'd found it, and walked back out into the party with my hands steady and my heart going like a drum against my ribs. 3 small bricks. Colton's mother, Deb, found me by the dessert table not long after. "It's such a relief," she said, smiling, "that you're finally being flexible about the money. Renata says you can be so rigid." I said nothing. That was brick 1. Reggie, Colton's business partner, laughed a little too loud near the drinks table. "Diane, you gotta let the kid breathe. Old money's no good if it just sits there collecting dust while the young folks struggle, right?" He clapped Colton on the shoulder. Brick 2. Then Kim, the loan officer, leaned toward me with a professionally warm smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Renata says you're just so protective. I told her grandmothers who care that much are rare these days. She said protective the way you'd say a word you didn't quite believe." Brick 3. Each one landed soft and small, almost polite, the way real cruelty in families usually does. Nobody raised a voice. Nobody had to. The second use of the phrase. I found Renata alone for a moment near the sliding door, and I tried, gently, to ask her about Riverstone, not accusing, just asking. Her face changed instantly, the openness sliding shut like a window. "Why were you in his office?" she asked, voice low and fast. "I took a wrong turn," I said, which was true. "You went looking," she said. "You always go looking. You always have to control everything, Mom." The second time. Same 4 words, sharper now, aimed with intent instead of frustration. "Stay with me, because what I decided to do next, I decided in about the time it takes to dry your hands at a kitchen sink. 1 motion, no second guessing. I decided I would not confront anyone that night. I would wait until they made the demand out loud, in front of witnesses, because I wanted every person in that house to hear exactly what was actually being asked of me. The direct demand confrontation, it came 20 minutes later, in the dining room, in front of Colton's parents, Reggie, Kim, and both of my grandchildren, who'd been allowed to stay up for cake. Colton stood at the head of the table and tapped his glass. "We wanted to say something while everyone's here," he began, smiling the easy, confident smile that had first made me like him. "Diane, Renata and I have been so grateful for your support over the years. And we know the trust for the kids is sacred to you. We respect that." I waited. "But we're asking tonight, in front of everyone." He glanced at Kim, at his parents, building the moment the way a man builds a pitch. "If you'd be willing to sign off on listing it as a qualifying asset for Birchwood. Just on paper. It stays yours, it stays the kids. It just needs your name on one form." Renata added, quieter, but just as pointed, looking straight at me. "Mom, please, just stop interfering and let us have this." Third time. Same phrase, dressed up as a plea instead of an accusation, but underneath it, unmistakably, a command. I let the silence sit. 1 second. 2, 3. Josie's fork clinked against her plate somewhere to my left. 4. Deb shifted in her chair. 5. Nobody filled it for me, which is exactly what I was waiting for. I wanted them to feel the weight of a room where no one was performing anymore. "No," I said. "Just that, at first." Then, calmly, "I won't sign anything tonight. And before anyone says another word about interference, I'd like everyone here to know what Riverstone contracting is." The reveal turned the room, went very still. Colton's smile didn't move for a second. The way a mask holds its shape even after the face behind it has already changed. "What?" I set my phone on the table, screen up, the photographed invoice visible. "I took a wrong turn earlier tonight and ended up in your office," I said, keeping my voice at the same even register I used to use on adjusters and embezzlers. "I found a second business account. Riverstone. Invoices billed to Castellano Blake clients. Your real company. The one Renata and I have both put money into, but paid into an account none of us have ever heard of." "You had no right to go through my things," Colton said, and his voice cracked half a register higher than it had a moment before. "First failure." "I didn't go through anything," I said. The folder was open on the desk. I photographed 4 pages and closed it exactly as I found it. You can ask your attorney whether that matters more than what's inside it. Reggie, beside him, had gone very quiet and very pale. "This is a family dinner," Colton tried again, louder this time, reaching for the room instead of for facts. "You're going to humiliate me over paperwork you don't even understand. I spent 31 years reading exactly this kind of paperwork," I said. "I understand it perfectly. What I'd like to understand better is why a pre-approval letter dated 11 days ago already lists our children's trust as a qualifying asset, before anyone asked me for permission." I turned the phone so Kim could see the second photo. Her professional smile finally, fully disappeared. "Kim," I said, "did you list an asset on a pre-approval application that the account owner had not yet agreed to disclose?" Kim opened her mouth, closed it, and said, carefully, "I'll need to review the file. Second failure, smaller, quieter, but just as visible to everyone at that table." Colton tried once more, standing now, his voice climbing towards something between panic and anger. "You don't understand what it's like. Running a business, keeping everyone afloat, you sit there with your pension and your trust and you judge." "I'm not judging that you struggled," I said. And I meant it. I could see, underneath the anger, something that looked genuinely like fear. A man watching a door close, that he'd been counting on staying open. "I'm asking why client money that wasn't yours to move went somewhere none of us could see it. That's not a grandmother being controlling, Colton. That's a business owner who needs to talk to his accountant tonight, not his mother-in-law." He sat back down. Third failure, no more words, just silence, which from a man who'd built the whole evening around performance, was its own kind of collapse. I looked at Renata last. She was staring at the phone on the table like it belonged to a stranger. "I don't owe you Birchwood," I told her quietly, without heat. "I never did. I never owed anyone access to what I built to protect Josie and Bo. I love you. That was never in question. But love isn't the same thing as unlimited access. And somewhere in the last year, the two of you stopped being able to tell the difference. Nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. Deb quietly gathered her purse. Reggie left without saying goodbye to anyone. Kim excused herself to make a call, and never came back to the table. Fallout plus double resolution in the weeks that followed. The real-world consequences arrived without my help. The way they usually do once the paper starts speaking for itself. Castellano Blake's accountant found the Riverstone account within a week. Colton had, to his credit, gone to her himself, rather than waiting to be caught by someone else. It wasn't outright theft, it turned out, but something messier and sadder. 2 years of increasingly desperate juggling, moving client deposits to cover payroll, then covering that gap with the next client's deposit, a wheel that never stopped spinning long enough for him to get off it. He owed refunds to 3 clients and was facing a state licensing review. Birchwood fell through within the month. The lender withdrew the pre-approval once the trust asset was formally disclaimed in writing by my attorney, and separately, once Riverstone surfaced in a routine business review. Kim's employer opened an internal inquiry into the pre-approval letter. I don't know what came of it, and I didn't ask. I wasn't interested in ruining anyone. I was only interested in the money that belonged to 2 children staying exactly where I'd put it. Renata didn't speak to me for 5 weeks. I let the silence be hers to break, the same way I once let a room's silence do the work I couldn't. I stopped reaching for the cereal Bo liked when I passed it at the grocery store. I stopped checking my phone every time it buzzed. I let myself grieve the version of that dinner I'd hoped for, instead of the one I got. Then, on a Tuesday evening in May, an envelope came in the mail, addressed in Renata's handwriting, no return note inside, just a photograph. Josie, maybe 2 years old at the time, asleep on my chest on our old porch swing, my hand resting over her back, both of us worn out from an afternoon of chasing bubbles across the yard. On the back, in Renata's writing, you've been protecting her since before she could talk. I think I finally understand what that costs you. I'm sorry it took a bank to make me see it. I sat on my own porch step with that photograph for a long time. I didn't call her that night. I wrote back instead 3 sentences, nothing more. I never stopped loving you while I was saying no. I hope one day the difference makes sense to you the way it does to me. The door's open whenever you're ready to walk through it as an adult, not a client. We're rebuilding slowly. Colton is in a payment plan with the state board and a much smaller company now, one he runs alone, out of a rented office instead of a home he can't afford. Renata calls me most Sundays. Last week she asked, for the first time in 4 years, whether I thought she should start her own retirement account. I told her yes. I didn't offer to fund it. She didn't ask me to. Here's what 31 years of reading other people's numbers, and 1 bad dinner reading my own family's, finally taught me. Love that can be pressured into silence was never protection at all. It was just a debt waiting for someone to collect on it. That's my story. If it meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe to MJ Drama Stories, because there's another one waiting for you next week. Approx. 3,150 words. Expand any section on request. I can extend the rising microhook section further to reach a full 7,500. To reach a full 7,500 to 8,000.